When we think about World War I, it's easy to just see it as, well, a war. But it was so much more than that. It was like a global system failure, a catastrophe that had been building up for decades. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and see how a single gunshot didn't just start a fight. It tripped a wire that brought an entire world order crashing down.
And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, let's look at the end result first. By the time the dust settled, four massive, centuries-old empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the German, and the Russian were just gone, wiped clean off the map. That's the kind of chaos we're diving into.
So how did the world get so fragile in the first place? Let's take a look at Europe before 1914. On the surface, it all looked pretty stable, but underneath, it was a place secretly rigged for total disaster. At its heart, the problem was a continent just brimming with power. You had these huge competing empires, all supercharged by new industrial technologies. And on top of that, this incredibly powerful and sometimes really aggressive sense of national pride. Honestly, it was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. Okay, so what exactly was in that powder keg? Well, historians have pretty much boiled it down to four main long-term causes. But let's not think of them as just a list. Think of them more like four highly volatile chemicals being mixed together, making an explosion almost inevitable. And here they are. It's easy to remember with the acronym MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. For decades, these four forces twisted and tangled Europe into this giant knot of tension, basically laying all the groundwork for catastrophe. First up, militarism. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution, countries could suddenly build massive armies and navies like never before. Get this, between 1870 and 1914, military spending across Europe pretty much doubled. And this created a really dangerous situation. The more a nation armed itself to feel safe, the more threatened its neighbors felt. So they armed themselves more. And you get this massive arms race where war starts to look like a perfectly reasonable option. Next, you've got imperialism. All the major powers were in this frantic scramble to carve up Africa and Asia, grabbing colonies for resources and, bragging rights. And this created constant friction. In fact, it almost started the war early. Take the Moroccan crisis, for example. Germany, Britain, and France came dangerously close to fighting over colonial turf. It was like a dress rehearsal for the main event. Then there's nationalism. And we're not just talking about patriotism here. This was an aggressive, competitive kind of pride. It was especially strong in brand new nations like Germany and Italy that were itching to prove themselves. For others, like France, it was all about revenge. They had this burning desire to reclaim the territories of Alsace and Lorraine that they'd lost to Germany. It wasn't just about land. It was a matter of national honor.
And finally, the one ingredient that tied it all together: alliances. This is the tripwire itself. These weren't just friendly handshakes. We're talking about rigid, binding military pacts. And here's the crucial part. It meant that a small fight between two countries was now almost guaranteed to become a massive brawl that pulled everybody in.
And this is what the continent looked like. Two giant armed camps just staring each other down. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And on the other, the Triple Entente: Britain, France, and Russia. Europe was officially split right down the middle. So, we've got the fuel, we've got the oxygen. All that's missing is the spark. And that spark came in the summer of 1914 in a city called Sarajevo. This is the moment it all happens. June 28th. A young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip steps out of the crowd. He raises a pistol. He fires. And just like that, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is dead. Now, this wasn't just a murder. It was a political explosion, a protest against Austria-Hungary's rule in the region. And now, the tripwires were pulled, one after another, with terrifying speed. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia, Serbia's big ally, mobilizes its army. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declares war on Russia, and then on Russia's ally, France. And finally, Britain is pulled in when Germany invades Belgium. A local crisis became a world war in just a matter of days. So once the war actually started, it became very clear very quickly that this was going to be unlike any other war in human history. All those romantic ideas of heroic cavalry charges and battlefield glory, they just evaporated in the face of a brutal new reality, a collision of old tactics and terrifying new technology.
The machine gun made charging across open ground basically suicide. This forced millions of men into the stagnant, muddy hellscape of trench warfare. Barbed wire trapped them in a killing field called no man's land. And for the very first time, poison gas drifted across battlefields, bringing this new kind of silent, indiscriminate terror. This new tech created a horrific stalemate that just chewed up lives for 4 incredibly long years. This quote just sums it up perfectly. You had generals sending men with 19th century strategies straight into the buzzsaw of 20th century weapons. The result wasn't a battle, it was slaughter on an industrial scale. Human lives became just another resource to be fed into the war machine.
The sheer, unbelievable scale of this stalemate forced the war to become something entirely new, a total war. Suddenly, the line between the battlefield and the home front was completely erased. Women went into factories in huge numbers to build shells and guns. Propaganda posters were everywhere, calling for sacrifice. Food was rationed. The war literally reached into every single home, demanding everything from every citizen. So, after 4 years of bloodshed on a scale nobody could have imagined, the war finally came to an end in 1918. But the world it left behind was fundamentally and permanently changed. Let's circle right back to where we started. This war didn't just end a conflict, it literally ended the empires that had defined the map of Europe for centuries. The Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the German, and the Russian empires. They all just collapsed, shattering the old order and redrawing the world map forever. And the economic balance of power completely upended. The war had financially wrecked Europe's economies. But at the same time, the United States, which got into the war late, came out of it far wealthier and way more powerful. This really marked its arrival as a true global superpower. So the war was officially settled by the Treaty of Versailles. But this brings us to our final and maybe most important question. The treaty absolutely ended the fighting, sure. But the really harsh terms it forced on Germany created these deep, bitter resentments that would just simmer for years. So, did it really guarantee peace? Or did it just plant the seeds for an even bigger, more terrible conflict yet to come?